A war is being fought over the Sahara Desert, and the United States is involved. American weapons are taking their toll. I spent 5 weeks in the war zones. This is the first in-depth American report on what could become a superpower conflict.
This program is made possible by a grant from the Independent Documentary Fund, which is supported by the National Endowment for the Arts, the Ford Foundation, the Program Fund of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by public television stations, and by additional grants from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the Samuel Rubin Foundation, the William and Mary Grieve Foundation, and by the Albert Kunstadter Family Foundation.
The war is being fought here, in the Western Sahara, in what seems to be a wasteland. But to the people involved in the war, it's a land worth fighting for. The Western Sahara, a desert nation the size of Colorado, is located on the west coast of Africa. It's the site of one of the world's largest deposits of phosphate and could have substantial untapped reserves of petroleum and iron ore. For these and other reasons, neighboring Morocco is occupying the Western Sahara, claiming it as part of Morocco's ancient empire. The Sahrawis, the indigenous people of the Western Sahara, are fighting against Morocco for their independence. Their small, desert guerrilla army is pitted against Morocco's modern, well-equipped armed forces. The United States is one of the main suppliers of weapons to Morocco, even though the Moroccan occupation of the Western Sahara is condemned internationally. The Reagan administration justifies its support of Morocco by putting top value on our friendship with that country.
Morocco, for 2 decades, has been a close and valued friend of the United States. They are a moderate Arab state. They are very helpful in terms of a series of initiatives in Africa. They are a strategically important country bordering on the Atlantic and on the Mediterranean. And they have been consistently supportive of the United States of America.
Another African country that's been friendly with the United States of America is Nigeria. Yet, its foreign minister feels the United States has chosen to support the wrong side.
For the United States, champion of justice, freedom, and rights of people to be on the side of the oppressor, as it were, it's a really very sad affair, and one sincerely hopes that the U.S. administrations would consider this matter in this light and pull out as best as they could, because you might say in the short run, U.S. may need to protect its strategic interests and friendships and so on, but in the long run, it's really creating a very bad name and very bad image for itself in Africa as a whole.
The real problem that ought to concern us in the Western Sahara is the potential which this conflict has for significant escalation, and the extent to which, if it should spill over into Morocco and Algeria, it could create a situation in which our own country and possibly the Soviet Union could be dragged in as well.
What today could become a superpower conflict started out as a simple regional struggle. The Western Sahara had been a colony of Spain since the end of the 19th century. But like the other people of Africa, the Sahrawis wanted to be free. So in 1973, the people of the Sahara began a war of independence against the Spanish colonialists. Their liberation movement was called the Polisario Front. After 2 years of battle with the Polisario, the Spanish decided to pull out.
At the time that the Spaniards disengaged, they had an inalienable legal obligation to give the people of that territory, as a territory, the right to make a decision as to what their future government was going to be. That's the way it was done everywhere else. Why not in the Western Sahara? The people of Western Sahara never had that right.
Instead of granting the Sahrawi people the right to choose their own government, the Spanish divided the Western Sahara into two and gave it away, the upper 2/3 to Morocco and the bottom third to Mauritania. When Morocco and Mauritania moved in their armed forces to secure their new territory, the Sahrawi people loyal to the Polisario Front became a target. An eyewitness whose foot was burned by napalm during a Moroccan air attack gives this account.
The planes came to bomb us on a Sunday at 11 a.m. in February of 1976. Many people were killed. During the attack, women who were pregnant had miscarriages. The limbs of children were blown off. Some were burned like ashes. The first day, the planes came back 3 times to bomb us. They came back every day that week to bomb again and again. The women fled. Those who were not hurt carried their children on their backs. We had to flee on foot. Thank God. The Polisario guerrillas found us. They got us out of there by capturing enemy vehicles to transport us to safety in Algeria. The Moroccans never broke our determination. No matter how long it takes, we must have our freedom and dignity. And even the last old Sahrawi lady like me will fight.
When all of the refugees were assembled in Algeria, a country that's always provided refuge to liberation movements, the Polisario began training its new recruits. Soon, its guerrilla army grew to a force of several thousand well-trained men. Their objective, to reclaim their homeland from the Moroccans. At the same time, Polisario followers were building the infrastructure for a nation. On February 27, 1976, they declared themselves a republic. Once a year, all Polisario supporters joined together to celebrate the birth of their nation. Today, their government in exile is recognized by 46 nations, but not by the United States. The U.S. remains one of the main suppliers of weapons to the government of Morocco. But we may be on the losing side. The guerrillas have regained control of 9/10 of the Western Sahara, even though they are outnumbered 10-to-1 by the Moroccan armed forces. Today, Morocco occupies only this small portion of the contested territory. To keep from losing it, the Moroccan army built a fortified defense wall around the entire area. I was airlifted to Morocco's front lines by Army helicopter. Ras Al Hamra has been the site of several major battles because this is where the defense wall begins. Being the first American journalist to report on this war, I received the full cooperation of the Moroccan government. During a 10-day tour of the war zones, I would visit nearly every major Moroccan military base and outpost in southern Morocco and the Western Sahara. Heavily armed Moroccan soldiers provided protection for me the entire time I was there. The colonel of Ras Al Hamra took me to his command post for a briefing on the defense wall and the strategy the Moroccan army is using in this desert war.
The Moroccan armed forces built a defense wall that begins here in Ras Al Hamra and extends over 400 kilometers. The end of the wall is 30 kilometers south of the capital, Al Ayoun. It's impossible for the enemy to penetrate the defense wall. Every 20 kilometers along this wall, there's a major resistance center, as you see here. The soldiers have collective as well as individual weapons. The wall itself is defended by mines, barbed wires, and trenches. We also have radar surveillance over the entire area, which allows us to detect personnel and vehicles within a 60-kilometer radius. Information from the radar is available to our light armored intervention forces situated 10 to 15 kilometers behind each resistance center. These intervention forces rush to the aid of the men at the wall in case of attack.
Although the wall area appears to be heavily fortified, Moroccan military officers claim they need even more weapons to fight the war effectively. The colonel at Zag, one of the most important military bases in southern Morocco, gave me his views.
The Sahara is a vast country. To control all of it, you need an army the size of the Chinese army.
Is there any kind of weapons that you need to fight the kind of war you have with the Polisario?
Indeed, we are patiently waiting to receive American weapons, because our neighbors are armed to the teeth by the Soviets. The military was very disappointed because we did not receive the weapons Morocco had wanted and asked for. After all, we are the traditional allies and friends of the Western world and the United States.
The colonel made it clear that there is hostility here on the Moroccan front towards the United States because Morocco's first request for military assistance was met with reluctance. Around the times that the arms package was being considered in the United States, there were reports of low morale in the Moroccan army.
During the Carter administration, the morale was low indeed. Why? Because the United States refused to help its friend. Morocco is one of the friends of the US, and Carter always turned his back on us.
In 1979, the king himself raised the complaint that the United States was letting down its friends. His complaint came in the midst of intense lobbying by Morocco for US military assistance.
I think the United States are now still shocked by the Vietnam War. And they not make the difference between an intervention from United States and the help from United States to their friends.
The king's request for military assistance created a policy debate at the White House. The president's national security advisor, Zbigniew Brzezinski, urged the Carter administration to sell the king the weapons he was asking for.
Morocco is a moderate Arab state that by and large has been quite decent in respect to the Arab-Israeli dispute and has exercised a moderating influence on other Arab attitudes. It certainly, I believe, is in our interest for the Arab world to become more moderate, more accommodating. And we can only achieve that if we stand fast when our friends get into a jam, even if they get into that jam of their own making, which perhaps was the case here. But once they're in a jam, you don't point your finger and say, well, you shouldn't have gotten into a jam and we're going to watch you sink. You help them.
Did you support the policy of allowing Morocco to use U.S. weapons in the Western Sahara, outside their internationally recognized borders?
I was deeply supportive of the human rights policy of non-proliferation and so forth, But I did not feel that in the circumstances of the real world in which we found ourselves, we could simply afford to let our friends down when they are confronting genuine security problems. This doesn't mean that I felt that Morocco was right in every respect in its policy towards the so-called Polisario. But I did feel that, on balance, we had to stand by Morocco, we had to be helpful, and we had to be helpful in a tangible and meaningful way.
On January 24, 1980, the policy debate ended in a victory for King Hassan II. President Carter approved the sale of a large package of counterinsurgency weapons for use in the war in the Western Sahara. Critics of the decision charged that United States weapons would escalate the conflict. But according to the President's Moroccan ambassador, the aim of the weapons was to bring King Hassan to the negotiating table.
The presidential policy was based upon the conviction that negotiations were the best avenue to peace and stability in Northwest Africa, and that the best way to ensure negotiations and to ensure that the king would come to the bargaining table was to strengthen his hand. What really counted was the fact that the United States was willing to support the policy of strengthening him so that he could negotiate. He felt a great deal more reassurance to have the United States understanding of his position.
The arms sales to Morocco included 20 F-5 fighters. Total cost, $170 million. 6 OV-10 Broncos, described as one of the deadliest and most versatile light strike counterinsurgency aircraft in the world, were also included. Total cost of the arms package, over $232 million, which Morocco couldn't afford, so the King of Saudi Arabia, monarch of another moderate Arab state, picked up the tab. Today in Morocco, the war machine is gobbling up nearly $3 million a day. Morocco spends more per capita on military expenditures than it does on education or health care. Many have blamed the war for Morocco's inflation rate and rising food costs.
Morocco is in severe economic difficulty. There were major riots last June that led to hundreds of people being killed, thousands of political prisoners being taken. It is a very unstable economy and a very unstable society. And it is the war in the Western Sahara that is just draining the resources that are needed by that country to get on to the tasks of economic development at home. 40% of the Moroccan budget has been committed to defense. And over $1 billion last year went into just the Western Saharan conflict. So I think that we would be doing our friend a favor by putting maximum pressure on King Hassan and on the Moroccan government to press for a negotiated settlement of this conflict and to avoid further military escalation.
This is the Moroccan town of Tantan. Like many other Moroccan towns, Tantan has not entirely joined the industrialized age. The standard of living here, typical of life throughout much of Morocco. According to a World Bank report, 1 out of every 3 Moroccans is living below the poverty level of $200 per year. (72% of Moroccans are illiterate. One out of every 7 Moroccan children die before they are 1 year old. Life expectancy here, only 56 years, compared to 73 years in the United States. In light of these facts, why then does Morocco continue to divert its resources, both human and financial, into a war that's being fought over a chunk of desert.
I'm sure from Morocco's point of view, it's a question of getting back what they had considered their old big empire. But of course, in the modern context, the natural resources available within the Western Saharan territory has also to be considered. Phosphate is an immediate one, and if Morocco were to have the phosphate deposits along with what it has, it probably will have the largest deposits of any in the whole world.
The Boukra phosphate mine in the Western Sahara is one of the largest deposits of phosphate in the world. Much of the phosphate here is untapped. Two valuable products are made from phosphate: fertilizer and uranium for nuclear weapons.
Yes, this is phosphate, yes.
This is the only mine in the Sahara.
In the Sahara?
It's not working.
No?
Yeah.
No. No, but...
Because of the war, the Boukra phosphate mine has not been in effective operation since 1976. Polisario attacks make it impossible to transport the phosphate out of here. The phosphate used to be shipped via this conveyor belt, the longest in the world. It stretches 66 miles, all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. Because the conveyor belt has been inactive for so long, drifting desert sands have covered it completely in some places. Here in the desert, the primary concern to Morocco is Polisario attacks. But in the occupied cities of the Western Sahara, Morocco has a different concern: the allegiance of the Sahrawis living here. This is the city of El Ayoun, the largest in the Western Sahara. In an effort to win the loyalty of the Sahrawis living here, the Moroccan government has pumped millions of dollars into the city and surrounding provinces. A Moroccan official describes one way in which that money was spent.
The Spanish left the Sahrawis here living in bad conditions, in shacks like these on the right. So the Moroccan government constructed 450 of these white houses and gave them to the people free of charge. Many of the housing complexes have their own schools and social centers. The government wants the Sahrawis to live like everyone else in the world, like all Moroccans.
In spite of government efforts to make El Ayoun Moroccan, the Sahrawis cling to their desert culture and traditions. To find out the attitudes of Sahrawis in El Ayoun, I conducted random street interviews. Everything that was said had to pass through this man from Morocco's Ministry of Information. Later, when I checked the accuracy of his translations, I found that he was distorting both my questions and their answers. Would you ask him if he thinks that the war has split the Sahrawi people and if he would like to see there be a reunion of the people?
قالت لك انت ضرك تشوف على ان اهل سكان الصحراء المغربيه منهم شبه الناس الشرقيين ياك قالت لك يا كانك تبغي هاي الناس تجتمع في بلد واحد وما تبقى هذه الحرب خالقه
احنا نبغى لا الهنا احنا الجره ما نبغوها نبغى لا الهنا
Bueno, dice que no queréis guerra y que quieren nada más que la paz y toda la gente vive junto aquí. Que no quiere guerra.
Ask him his feelings about the war between the Polisario and the Morocco.
قالت لك هذه الصيدة قالت لك تظهر لك في هاي الحرب اللي عدوا علينا هاو الناس الشرقيين كانها معقولة ولا ما هي معقولة؟ قالت لك تظهر لك في اللي عدلوا كانوا زين ولا ما هو زين؟
كلها زين وعندك ما نعرف لهمش ما عندنا هم فلوسهم. احنا عندنا ما هو زين وهم ما نعرف لهمش.
Dice que, bueno, dice, primeramente dice que no sabe nada. Después dice, bueno, eso es cosa no es buena para nosotros.
Why isn't it a good thing?
قال لك علاه في نظرك انت اللي يعدلوا الناس ما هو زين. قال لك علاه في نظرك انت اللي يعدلوا الناس ما هو زين.
في نظري يعني انه ما هو زين بنادم يهرب عن ترابه ويخليها ما هي زين.
Dice que no es bueno porque ellos marchan lo cogen los de Algeria desde aquí, de su tierra, y le quedan ahí, que no es bueno, y viene para matar a sus hermanos o sus hijos, que no es lógico.
The interview shows that Morocco exercises control over the flow of information here, a reminder of how restrictive military occupation is. In fact, Sahrawis living under Moroccan control are not free to join the Polisario or any other organized resistance movement. All forms of opposition are banned by the Moroccan government. The main opposition group, the Polisario Front, is headquartered here in Tindouf, Algeria, 400 miles from El Ayoun. Very little is known by the United States about the Polisario or its supporters living here because of a government policy forbidding all direct contact.
I have always considered that it was a little bit unfair and prejudged the situation that Washington under the Carter administration allowed American diplomats to go into the Moroccan-controlled Western Sahara, but didn't even allow any of us who were assigned to Algeria to go down and visit the refugee camps in Tindouf.
These are the Polisario camps. The part of Algeria where the Polisario supporters live is known as no man's land, a difficult place even for Sahrawis who are accustomed to desert life. I am one of the few Americans to visit or film here. Tens of thousands of people live in these tent cities, but 95% of the adult population is female. The men are off fighting in the war. During the week I spent here while waiting to go into the war zones, I had a chance to learn about Sahrawi culture. The women enjoyed showing me the traditional Sahrawi hairdo and dress. It was a way of getting them to open up, to share information with me about how the war is changing their lives.
المجتمع التقليدي بالنسبة لنا كانت المرأة فيه.
In traditional society, women had a limited but not unimportant role. Women stood side by side with their men and participated with them in all sorts of things. We even tended the herds. We have always been active and important. The most important thing we're doing now is to teach our children to be conscious of their role in reclaiming our homeland and to prepare them to take their share of the responsibility in facing the future. They are our future. Men have their role in this struggle, but so do we. Our roles are complementary. The man is out in the battlefield facing the enemy, while we women are here in the camps, taking charge of the rear bases.
In case of an attack by the Moroccans, the women are responsible for defending themselves and the children. So each woman receives 1 year of basic military training. One of the women instructors explains the threat they live under.
Like all colonialists, Morocco wants to control and exploit our country and its wealth. But the Moroccans are convinced that as long as one Sahrawi is alive, they can't achieve this goal. Therefore, their objective is to exterminate all the population of the Western Sahara.
As we traveled between camps, I saw that even the old have a role in this new society. They man the outposts between camps and monitor traffic. The elders are respected today just as they were in nomadic times. In keeping with that, a council of elders met with me on behalf of the entire camp population. Does he think that you will win the struggle?
Yes, I'm sure we will win. We will win because all of the Sahrawi people are involved in the struggle for freedom now. When our revolution started, there were only 5 of us. Just 5. But we are united now, and that is why we will win. Tell her to tell the press of the world that when we send our sons to the battlefield, it's part of our tradition for their mothers and fathers to tell them, don't come back. Die fighting for your country and for your freedom. We aren't afraid of death. A man who's afraid to fight has no reason to come back. Come back for what? "25 seasoned guerrillas in worn battle fatigues arrived at the refugee camp to escort me into the war zones of the Western Sahara. Before leaving, I was asked to sign forms releasing both the Algerian government and the Polisario Front of all responsibility if I got killed inside the Sahara. I would live with the guerrillas for 2 weeks. During that time, we would cover 500 miles of desert and would visit all of the major Polisario strongholds. As the guerrilla leader showed me the route we would follow inside the Sahara, I thought about the irony of traveling in a war zone where I could be killed with weapons made by my own country. Our caravan of 5 Land Rovers sped toward the war zones at neck-breaking speeds. During the day, temperatures would reach as high as 135, but at the early morning hour we left, the temperature was only 40 degrees, and the wind was strong. It was cold. There was nothing for protection. Even the windshields had been broken out, so Moroccan planes flying overhead couldn't see the glare. Mahabes, our first destination, was a hub of nomadic trading activity in the Western Sahara before the war began. But that isn't the case now. Like all of the Western Sahara cities controlled by the Polisario, Mahabes is a ghost town.
Before the Moroccan occupation, there were 7,000 Sahrawis living in the city of Mahabes and in the surrounding area. But the objective of the Moroccan army was not only to occupy the Western Sahara, it was also to annihilate the population. That's the reason none of our people, supporters, live here, even though Mahabes is liberated and under our full control. If anyone lived here, they'd be bombed by the Moroccan Air Force as they were before. That's why our people stay in the camps in Algeria where they are safe.
I saw nothing but rubble and reminders of the fierce fighting that took place here when the Polisario won control in 1979.
In the operation of Mahabes, we captured 69 prisoners, 80 trucks and more than 400 tons of different caliber ammunition. During the attack, our troops killed more than 600 Moroccans, 1/2 the total number of Moroccan troops stationed at the garrison.
Estas plantas son de nuestras tierras y son bonitas.
This is our land, and these are our flowers. They are beautiful. I wish our women and children and old people back in the camps could smell the flowers. For 7 years, they haven't seen the flowers or their land. Things can't go on like this. It's unacceptable. It's inhuman.
On the next leg of our journey, we cross the border into Morocco itself, where the guerrillas occupy a former Moroccan military base. I wondered how safe it is to be on Moroccan soil with nothing for protection except 25 guerrillas armed with automatic Kalashnikov Soviet rifles. From what I observed, the guerrillas weren't concerned at all. In fact, when we came across an abandoned Moroccan tank, they stopped to strip it down. Without tools, it was a struggle, but the guerrillas were determined. They have to be. This is how they survive. By utilizing everything the Moroccans leave behind. Luberat was a major Moroccan military base. From it, Morocco attacked key towns and Polisario positions within the Western Sahara. According to the Polisario, 5,000 Moroccan troops were stationed here when the guerrillas attacked in 1979. Some of the guerrillas who participated in the Battle of Luberat met us at the garrison and explained how they defeated the Moroccan army. Polisario launched its surprise attack before the sun rose. From every direction, the guerrillas advanced dangerously close on foot and by Land Rover. During the 2-hour Battle of Luberat, Morocco's sophisticated weaponry proved to be no match for the Polisario's guerrilla tactics. The Polisario claims that it's captured a total of 2,000 Moroccan soldiers over the years. The Moroccan army, on the other hand, didn't have any prisoners of war to show me. At an undisclosed site in the desert, the Polisario allowed me to meet with hundreds of Moroccan soldiers they're holding as prisoners. When were you captured?
I was captured at Hagunia, 10 kilometers south of Hagunia.
And where's Hagunia?
Hagunia is in the Sahara.
And you're a Moroccan?
Yes, of course.
Why were you fighting in the war? Why were you fighting against the Sahrawis?
Because I am a soldier. I don't have the choice.
Do you think Morocco will win the war? Do you think Morocco will win the war?
I don't think, because this war is a war of independence, and the Sahrawis will have their independence.
Do you wish the war would end?
Yes, of course. I'm sorry for my family.
Why?
Because I threw my family, now my wife have 40 children on the arms, and she can't be married, she can't live, she can't do anything.
Do you think peace will come? Do you think the Sahrawis and the Moroccans can be at peace with one another?
I hope that the Moroccan and Sahrawis sit around the table and discuss for this problem, and the Sahrawis can have their independence.
Seeing the evidence of Polisario victories made me think that this is a war that can be won by the guerrillas. That conclusion is contradictory to the Pentagon's assessment.
I cannot see how the Polisario can hope to win this war, nor can I see how Morocco can hope to win the war. This is, as long as Algeria is a sanctuary for the Polisario, and as long as Morocco is 50 times the size of the Polisario, neither side can hope to win the war militarily.
Mr. West has never been to the Polisario side. The two fact-finding missions he led in 1981 spent time only with the Moroccan armed forces. Therefore, it's not surprising that he seems to underestimate the capability and determination of the Polisario to win. The desert is one of the most inhospitable battlefields in the world, but the guerrillas have turned even that to their advantage by learning how to make camp anywhere. The guerrillas have a saying that a man alone in the desert is a dead man. So everyone pitches in. Food and water are scarce here. We carried only enough water for drinking. It was carefully rationed, even though it looked and tasted just like gasoline. When the goat we had been carrying with us was brought out for the kill, it marked the beginning of a special occasion. In keeping with Islamic tradition, the soldiers slit the goat's throat from west to east. Every part of the goat was carved up, either to be eaten or to be utilized. Fighters out in the field make do with an occasional piece of dried camel meat. So our cooked goat stew drew all of the local guerrillas out of hiding. This one is the regional commander, a respected veteran, 62 years old. The meal was like a celebration until he found out that I'm an American. The U.S. government had just delivered some OV-10 reconnaissance planes to the Moroccans, so the commander took out his anger on me.
You may be able to swallow our food, but I know you can't digest it. We know what the Americans are giving to Morocco. The United States should be supporting us. You fought your own revolution, just as we are doing now.
The old fighter embarrassed the younger guerrillas. He was exposing too much of his real feelings and theirs too. They were hesitant to translate his words.
My sons, tell her exactly what I am saying. She must know the truth.
Somos americanos. Do you like the Americans since they give weapons to Morocco?
Tell her I said America is a great power. We were looking only to establish brotherly relations and mutual respect with the United States, if it was possible. But since they support Morocco against us, we don't like them. We hate the Americans. Tell her this exactly as I have said it.
If the message has reached Washington that we are making enemies out of the Sahrawi people, it hasn't had much impact. Rather than decreasing military assistance to Morocco, the United States government is increasing it, even though official government policy is one of neutrality.
One of the major differences in foreign policy between the Reagan administration and the Carter administration is the approach towards arms sales. The Reagan administration has adopted a much more permissive policy on arms sales. The Carter administration emphasized restraints. In the case of Morocco, the Carter administration sought to link the provision of arms to movement towards political negotiations involving the Western Sahara War. The Reagan administration has dropped that explicit linkage.
The support of the United States should not be subject to debate. It should be forthcoming and quick. This was not the case for us in the past. Now, however, we feel there is a better understanding.
108 M60 tanks had been requested by Morocco during the Carter administration, but their sale was never approved. Secretary of State Haig, however, in one of his first official acts of office, approved the sale of the M60 tanks to Morocco. In the fall of 1981, the Reagan administration took yet another step by sending U.S. military advisors to Morocco. The decision came after Morocco suffered heavy losses because of a Polisario attack on its outpost of Gelta Zamor in the Western Sahara. Gelta is 135 miles south of the Moroccan border. During the battle, the Polisario shot down 2 Moroccan fighters, each costing $15 million, and 3 other Moroccan military planes. That's 8% of the entire Moroccan Air Force. After the battle, the King of Morocco appealed to the United States for more military assistance, on the basis that for the first time, the Polisario had used Soviet surface-to-air missiles known as SAM-6s. The United States came to the aid of Morocco after an investigation by Mr. West of the Pentagon. What were your recommendations?
My first and strongest recommendation was better training.
What type of training specifically?
Well, basically, it has to be training for their pilots in order to know how to evade SAMs and how to attack a SAM system.
Will there be U.S. military advisors going to Morocco to conduct this training?
Well, advisors is a term that ever since Vietnam has left a bad taste in the mouths of many people. I would point out that at any given time, we have approximately 40 teams scattered somewhere around the world giving some sort of training help. And we do now have such a team in Morocco.
Appearing before the Congressional Foreign Affairs Committee, Secretary of State Haig was asked to justify the decision to increase Moroccan military assistance. In his testimony, the Secretary made a serious mistake. Haig accused the Polisario of using SAM-6 missiles to attack inside Morocco, not in the Western Sahara.
The incident which triggered the expression of concern by Morocco was not Moroccan activity in the Sahara, but an attack against Moroccan territory by highly sophisticated forces with the most sophisticated equipment. It's awfully important we keep objectivity and balance in our expression of the situation.
During my investigation of the Secretary's testimony, I questioned one of his spokesmen. He admitted that Haig had made a serious mistake because the Polisario SAM-6 attack was in the Western Sahara at Gelta Zamor, which the U.S. government does not recognize as Moroccan territory. The State Department claims that Haig made an honest mistake, but when I requested an interview with the Secretary, it was denied, and the congressional hearing record has not been corrected. At the Pentagon, I asked their top expert for justification of the new policy, and he made the same mistake Haig had.
We will, in conjunction with some other nations, assist militarily in terms of the sales of military equipment to provide for the legitimate self-defense needs of Morocco, because these SAM-6 attacks have taken place inside Morocco, 70 miles inside Morocco.
Where is that?
This is at a place called Basied. This happened on November 20th.
Mr. West is mistaken on 2 counts. There is no such place as Basied in Morocco, and there has never been a SAM-6 attack inside Morocco. This has been confirmed by the State Department and the Moroccan government.
I think in the conduct of our foreign policy, whether that foreign policy is under a Republican or a Democratic administration, we tend to indulge in great exercises in self-deception. We want so desperately for the world to be the way we want it that we end up believing our own propaganda. And that's one of the things I think that has prevented us from taking a realistic view of the war in the Western Sahara.
Does the United States government have a realistic view of who is fighting this war and why?
The Polisario claims that it is a national liberation movement, but because many of its weapons are of Soviet origin, paid for by Colonel Gaddafi, the United States government implies that the Polisario is not a national liberation movement, but rather that it's an agent of Libyan expansionism in North Africa.
The linkage to Libya and the linkage to Gaddafi is very troubling.
In what sense?
Well, in the sense that if you become linked to somebody in that you're accepting his pay, you're accepting his weapons, you're accepting his training, you're accepting practically everything from him, Polisario cannot stand by themselves, then one can assume that Gaddafi has some influence over the policies.
The Moroccans go one step further. They accuse the Polisario of having direct ties to the Soviets. At Ras Al Hamra, I was shown a collection of Polisario landmines the Moroccans claim are of Soviet origin. Later, the Moroccan foreign minister cited captured weapons like these as evidence of Soviet control over the Polisario.
There is concrete proof that some factions of subversion of the Polisario received their military and ideological training in the Soviet Union. We have also, as proof of Soviet involvement, the captured Polisario weapons. If the weapons were not directly from the Soviet Union, they were from countries which are allies of the Soviet Union. What we have witnessed also, which is more worrisome, is that there is a similarity between what is happening in the Moroccan Sahara today and what has happened in the Horn of Africa and in certain areas of Central and Southern Africa.
I can't believe that the Moroccans who are saying that actually believe what they're saying. I think they believe that such statements would be sweet words to the ears of the present U.S. administration. And they will tell a U.S. reporter that in the hope that it will be reported to the right quarters, and they will thus get sympathy for their cause. But I'm absolutely certain there is no Soviet hand in this. This is not saying that there are not, the Polisario is not getting Soviet weapons, but they are getting it through straightforward, honest purchase and delivery by Libya, for example. And if it cannot be obtained from the West, why can't it be obtained from the Soviet Union?
How will the arms race in the Western Sahara end? Does a continuing war mean even greater involvement of the United States?
I would expect that as the Polisario escalates the war, we are going to supply more and more military equipment, and indeed now we're going so far as to offer training in counterinsurgency.
What most concerns me is the extent to which we're now beginning to hear some talk from the administration that they are thinking of sending military advisors, presumably to help the Moroccan troops in the Western Sahara. And I think the last thing we want is another Vietnam.
We are getting over what was certainly the hangover from Vietnam, which was that we had to keep our distance from all other countries in the world with the exception of Western Europe. I think we are snapping out of that.
We have militarized our foreign policy.
A retired admiral of the United States Navy is one of those concerned about the recent escalation of arms sales by the United States.
President Reagan and his administration are exporting weapons all over the world. This year, we will be selling $15 billion worth of military weapons to countries all over the world. That's more weapons than all the countries in the world sell, including the Soviet Union. We are the world's largest exporter of weapons.
One of the fundamental faults in the foreign policy of the Reagan administration, in my view, is the extent to which they seem to feel that the way to solve any problem which exists in the world is to throw arms at it.
Weapons may prove to be a poor choice for solving world problems. They haven't ended the war here in the Western Sahara.
And our policy of providing weapons for use in places like the Sahara is putting the United States in the position of being criticized for violating important principles of international conduct.
To the extent that a superpower supplies arms to a government to help it, a friendly government to help it occupy another country which is, was, or ought to be independent under international law, it is violating both legal and moral precepts.
I believe the involvement of the United States is really viewed with some sadness because we all look at the United States as a country where people came to obtain freedom and from the oppression of the old continent in Europe, and have obtained it, and are the symbol of freedom and justice in the whole of the world.
Our government and those of our allies have expressed moral revulsion at the police state tactics of Poland's oppressors.
Often the United States does live up to its image as the symbol of freedom and justice in the world. Like in the crusade President Reagan is leading against martial law in Poland.
Make no mistake, their crime will cost them dearly in their future dealings with America and free peoples everywhere. How can they possibly justify using naked force to crush a people who ask for nothing more than the right to lead their own lives in freedom and dignity?
In light of statements like this, how can the President possibly justify continued arms sales to Morocco when those weapons are being used in the Western Sahara? After all, the aspirations of the Sahrawi people are no different from the aspirations of the people in Poland.
The Sahrawi people are merely struggling for the right to live and be independent. We want to be at home, to live freely on our land, the land on which our ancestors have lived for thousands of years. We have nothing against the United States, except that it is supplying weapons to Morocco. Our most ardent hope is that the wounds created by these weapons will be healed as soon as possible. And that the Sahara and America can establish good relations.
Transcript, send $2 to Non-Fiction Television, Blood and Sand, Post Office Box 862, New York, New York 10101. Non-Fiction Television is produced under the auspices of the Television Laboratory at WNET-13 and is designed to support and present documentaries for public television by independent film and video makers. The points of view expressed in these programs are those of the independent producers.